So it's a wild, wild world. The definition of the role will probably change in a few months or maybe a year, but for now, those are the major focuses of what we're thinking about, which is pretty broad.
I have Chase Mccants with Beam Dental with us today. So you're head of employee experience, and explain to me your role and responsibilities.
Yeah, so it's I always say I'm the newly appointed head of employee experience, and so what that focuses on is thinking about the employee life cycle from the start. So, at the point where they first make contact with Beam to say that they're interested in starting a role with us, all the way through their time with the company and as they grow through it. So, thinking about that experience, their engagement, their happiness, we'll be working on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in our organization, not only to make our team diverse, which we do a really good job of, but also making sure that folks feel like they're welcome. And so I'm going to steal this quote from someone that I love, and I say it every single time I talk about inclusion. Diversity is making sure that everyone is invited to dinner. And inclusion is making sure that everyone has something to eat when they come to dinner. And so, right now, the big focus is on making sure everyone has something to eat, and doing things like this, talking to folks like you about things that we've done at Beam. We've had a lot of successes, had some failures as well. And so, being a person that came to Beam as a startup and really, at some points had no idea what I was doing. I had a good idea of what I'd like to do and the outcome. And so it was just a lot of experimenting, using opportunities like these to share it with folks, whether you're a founder or you are an HR guy or girl or non-binary person, giving some clues as to, hey, you can have these crazy ideas. You can borrow or steal some of mine if you'd like, or if you've got some that you think you would fit your company, like go for it.
I think one thing that's fascinating to a lot of people is that in articles we read about companies when they're scaling up, it's usually about raising money and financially performance or their amount of customers they have and all that growth. And a little bit lost in the discussion in that kind of meta startup world is about how are they building and identifying and scaling talent. When you got to Beam, I'm guessing there was a limited amount of infrastructure around being able to go from X employees, 25 employees to now 200 plus. Talk about that initial experience of getting in there and beginning the process of thinking about not only the cultural dimensions but then the logistical dimensions of that.
Yeah, so I would say in the early experience of Beam, there was a bit of there were a bit of things already set up in a way. So Beam had been a company since 2012, and I joined in April of 2018. But so there was an interview process. But it differed depending on the part of the organization you were in, and the experience that you had if you were a candidate would often change depending on the role, depending on who you talk to, and a bunch of things. And so when I first came to Beam, my job, and I was lucky that given the speed of a startup, that this was allowed. But my job was just to observe, right? See what was already in place, see what worked. But the biggest thing that I wanted to focus on was, why was it in place? What were we hoping to gain from it, right? So I did that not only on the recruiting side, because I think at the time there were only about 35 employees and everyone mostly got along, which was great. So not too many HR issues there. But I needed to observe what was happening with our interview process, but then also trying to get a feel for the organization itself. One thing that a lot of folks make the mistake of assuming is that all startups are the same. They're just these really fun places to work, and you can wear whatever you like, and everyone has a great time. But if you look a little bit deeper, if you spend even a week with a startup, you'll notice that they have different personalities, right? And one thing that I had to understand, my former life was at Cover My Meds. I needed to see, how did Cover My Meds' personality differ from Beam's personality? And there was a really big difference. And so I spent that first month just observing Fro, observing his interactions with his employees, observing their reactions to, different things that he said, did, what company meetings were like, and things like that. And then once I had a good idea of what it all meant, I started getting to work. One of the biggest things that I wanted to do was streamline the interview process. At the time, I was the head of talent, which was talent acquisition and talent management. That's a lot for a single person to do. And so I needed to streamline a little bit. So we standardized our interview process so that everyone had just about the same experience. We implemented a service that the company had already purchased. It was an applicant tracking system, so we started using that, and we just kept going. We started going through the interview process, moving people at a steady rate. Wasn't always perfect. There were some times where I maybe, I might have forgotten to reach out to someone. And so, took notes on that and made improvements. We took this giant thing, and I think this is our claim to fame, the grit interview. So our core values spells out grit, growth, resilience, initiative, and tenacity. Now there's an extra T, but back then there were only those four. And so I saw this. I'm talking a lot, but I saw this. Our employees really latched on to that because we talk about culture and all that stuff. And our employees really latched on to grit and showed it actively throughout the office. And so again, in streamlining my job, I said, well, if we're vetting for people who can do the job and we need to grow a lot, why not also vet for those core values? And so not only did we start integrating our core values into the interview process so that we could vet the skill and the character at the same time, but we actually have an entire part of our interview devoted to our core values, the culture of our organization. I will give one caveat before I stop talking for a bit. When we talk about culture at an organization, usually folks think, would I want to hang out with this person? Would I get a drink with them? When we talk about culture at Beam, it's not about would we have a drink with them. That's not why we come to work. What we're talking about is, can that person work in this environment? When I talk about growth, resilience, initiative, and tenacity, and now team first, we're not describing how do we hang out. We're describing how we work. How do we collaborate? How do we coordinate our efforts, right? And so we're looking for that and evidence of that in a person that we're bringing into the company, so that we know that not only can they do the job, but they can do the job with us as well.